Hi, I'm Boz. I've been making games for a little over 10 years now. Way back when I started making games, I spent 2 years agonizing over every detail of my first game. Once I had a map, a skill tree, boss fights, hours of content, and a tutorial, it was finally ready for playtesting. Now, if you're an indie dev and that last sentence didn't make you cringe, this video is for you. I'm making this video as a warning to maybe myself in the past, so do not do that. You wait 2 years to test your game? No, try to test your game after a week of prototyping. Many devs, especially beginners, underestimate the real value of playtesting. I made this video to amplify the importance of getting feedback and give you some ideas on how to approach it. The short answer to why you should playtest: playtesting increases the quality of a game design per hour of development. In other words, you can make a better game in less time. If you don't playtest, my hope is that the first thing you do after watching this video is schedule one. And if you do playtest, then I hope this video helps you playtest even harder. Before we begin, playtesting often gets mixed with quality assurance, so I want to point out the distinction. Quality assurance testing, or QA, is about functionality. That's finding bugs, typos, and other problems. Whereas playtesting is about putting your game in front of fresh players to see where the magic happens. Playtesting is for proving how appealing your game is. Most indie devs seem to know they should be playtesting, but whenever I ask if they are, I often hear a lot of excuses, from myself included. The excuses usually center around the following sentiment: there's no time. But what if I told you that the designers of the most successful games consider playtesting the highest priority in game development? Mike Ambinder, Valve's former principal research scientist, says, "For us, playtesting is the most important part of the game development process. It is the dominant factor that shapes our decisions about what to release and when to release it." I reached out to him to see if he had more to say on the subject. He did.
Every game design is a hypothesis. Playtests are our experiments. What we're doing is trying to apply the scientific method to game design. It is a process that has worked in every domain for thousands of years, and it works in games too. We're all after just making a game that is appealing to the people who are going to play it. And so the best way to do that is to put the game in front of people who are not you, who are not making the game, and gather feedback from them, and then iterate and improve the game and the designs as a consequence.
Mike emphasizes that playtesting is a scientific tool to assess uncertainty and that the answers lie within your players. He had a lot of other amazing things to say, and we'll hear more from him later in the video. I often compare game design to blindly stumbling forward in the dark. In this metaphor, playtesting is like a distant lightning strike, briefly illuminating the landscape, allowing you to check your path and make adjustments, or reveal you're about to walk off a cliff. Shell Games has the following guiding principle: playtest constantly. It's the only way to know. In a 2024 GDC talk, Francisco Suki, the principal game designer of Shell Games, credited the success of their games to the rapid player testing workflow. We'll come back to this workflow later. Playtest constantly exemplifies this idea of checking your path in the dark. Playtesting steers your development process towards what players connect with. What the Shell team realizes is that playtesting prevents you from planning too far into the future on just a hunch. Richard LeMarchand, co-lead of the Uncharted series, says while his focus in game design today is playtesting, it wasn't always seen as an invaluable tool. In a GamesUserResearch.com interview, he said in the 90s and even in the early 2000s, playtesting and especially user research wasn't very prevalent. In fact, it wasn't until he was working for Naughty Dog in the late 2000s that he says the importance of playtesting really clicked for him. The struggle to make playtesting a part of the dev process is touched on in the book The Secret Science of Games. The author, John Hobson, has been a research lead for Halo, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, Destiny, and more. In his book, he writes about how during the development of Halo, Bungie had an initial hesitance to bring playtesting into the fold. But as they began to see the positive results, successive titles allowed playtesting to become more and more integrated with the development process. Knowing it took the industry multiple decades to catch on to playtesting makes me feel a little less dumb for not playtesting for 2 years, but only a little. I reached out to John to see if he had more insight into why it took the industry so long to embrace playtesting, and he pointed to the growth of online feedback post-release. Before internet reviews, game developers used to ship games and rarely hear from players. He believes that today, it's easier to convince game developers to incorporate a more structured version of player feedback earlier in the process to avoid problems with angry players at release. This may be more of a AAA problem than an indie problem, but if you needed another reason to playtest, just imagine an onslaught of angry reviews of something you could have easily avoided by collecting feedback before launch. Daniel Kahneman was a Nobel Peace Prize winner who, despite being a psychologist, became known as the grandfather of behavioral economics. If you've ever heard of cognitive biases before, he and Amos Tversky were the first to introduce them. Kahneman says, "Intuition feels just the same when it's wrong and when it's right." Academic researchers have repeatedly confirmed that professionals often contradict their own prior judgments when given the same data on different occasions. Kahneman calls this the illusion of skill. But that doesn't mean you can't trust your intuition. It's not until you are confronted with failure, adapt, and then find what works that you begin to build an intuition you can trust. Kinda sounds like playtesting, right? In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman says intuitions must be based on real expertise. And in order to develop expertise, experience isn't enough. It must exist in a context of rapid and clear feedback. We can turn that into the following algorithm. This is just a complicated way of saying more feedback and experience means better intuition. Imagine a computer programmer and a wealth advisor, both with 20,000 hours of experience in their respective fields. Which of the two do you think has accumulated the most expertise in their field? Who can make the best predictions about the results of their recommendations? Kahneman was once given a rare opportunity to analyze 8 years of data for 25 wealth advisors. Here's what he discovered. Differences in skill were not to be found. The results resembled what you would expect from a dice rolling contest, not a game of skill. The reason for this? Clarity of feedback. The stock market is unpredictable by design. If it was possible to predict the market, it would be completely upended. It wouldn't work. The feedback, it's too ambiguous to know exactly what you did, wrong or right. There's little room to adapt. The computer programmer, on the other hand, the compiler will almost immediately tell them if the code worked or not, and they can measure how code revisions improve performance data. The data is unambiguous and clear. So whose expertise do you trust more? Let's turn that formula into terms of your current game design. Okay, I got into the weeds making a spreadsheet with like game design scores and complicated formulas and everything, and let's just say it got a little overcomplicated. It's probably obvious from looking at the algorithm that the more you test and the clearer the feedback, the more you can trust your game design. Think of playtesting as a multiplier buff on your insight score per hour of game design. Conversely, if you test too infrequently, it can counteract the amount of time you spent working on your game. Remember that bit about the crack of lightning revealing you're about to walk off a cliff? In other words, playtesting helps you get more productivity out of each hour of game design. Okay, so we know we want rapid and clear feedback, but what does that look like? How often should you be testing? Well, that depends on your resources and where you are in the project. Remember earlier when I mentioned shell games and the rapid player testing workflow? Francisco Suki says their team aims to have a build ready by the end of every week. Their testing team then puts the build in front of outside testers over the weekend. They start every Monday discussing what the test sessions taught them, and then plan what to focus on for the week. All this will culminate in a new build on Friday, ready for testing. Not every company tests the same. Others wait until they're nearing a milestone on a feature and then try to iterate as fast as possible at the end. In my projects, we often enter milestones where we are working on a feature for a month or two, and as it nears completion, I begin scheduling tests. I then aim to playtest as often as I can make updates between playtests. This could be anywhere from a new test within an hour, to a test each day, to taking a week to make more serious changes. Obviously, your ability to test will depend on how long it takes for you to actually build what you want to test. But you also have to consider balancing the time you spend managing playtesting with the time you spend building your game. In the case of Shell Games, while they have people who handle the testing and create reports for the designers still need to watch or attend the test for best results. You choose a style that works best for you, but my advice is don't get caught up thinking everything has to be perfect before you can test. More on that later. How many people should you test with?
The short and unsatisfying answer is as many as you can. You make do with the constraints you have. The more people you get data from, the more insight you will be able to accumulate. But if you can only ask 4 people, then you make the best of those 4 people. It's just being cognizant that if you haven't surveyed a larger amount of people, then your data is going to be noisier.
Fortunately, the more often you test, the more perspectives you bring to your design. Now, unlike the stock market, game development can receive much clearer feedback. But there's a trick to it. Adrien Dijon, how do you say that? I'm gonna go grab his name from the video right quick.
My name is Adrien de Jong, Adrian in simple English.
Okay, yeah. He touches on this topic in a 2017 GDC talk called Playtesting, Avoiding Evil Data. To summarize, there are different ways of testing that can give you useless, confusing, or incomplete data. In the video, he discusses how to get the most from your playtesting. He talks about ways to collect analytics, surveys, in-game player data, and heat maps. These can tell you where players are having problems, and it's good feedback to collect, but it's far from the whole story. What this data doesn't tell you is why players are having problems. He says, by far, the best way to get clear feedback to understand the why is to watch people play your game. I'll link the video in the description. I reached out to
Adrien de Jong
to ask if he had more advice specifically on how to improve clarity and feedback. He emphasized 2 main tips. 1, be open to the feedback, and 2, don't focus on what the players say, focus on why they are saying it. These are powerful tips, and I want to dig into each separately. Being open to feedback involves getting out of your own way, which is a lot harder than it sounds. Getting clear feedback is a journey of self-discovery. It's about building skill with listening, empathy, player psychology, and overcoming your inner biases. Adrian says, it's likely that some parts feel core, something that shouldn't change. It takes real courage to look at someone playing, recognize that that core isn't good enough or what you had hoped it would be, and make drastic changes to improve the game's experience. You have to balance what you wanted from the design and how the players are reacting to it. It's a compromise between your vision and what your audience really wants. There's a dangerously fine line between your ego and good results, and it's experience that will help you navigate this problem.
So another way to think about it is that I never want to be afraid to find out if my idea is a good one or a bad one. I should crave that feedback, right? If I'm making a game for other people, I should want to get the game in front of other people as quickly as I can to find out if it's working for them. You know, if it's working for me, that's great, but I'm not the audience, right? Other people are. And so I should want to find out quickly and effectively and efficiently as I can, is it working? And if I'm afraid to do so, right, then I'm probably afraid of my game design.
While everything playtesters say is valuable, it's also important to take their feedback with a grain of salt to prevent yourself from being misled by what players are saying.
People are not great at explaining why they do what they do. Obviously, what people say can be very helpful, but I for sure would want to correlate anything somebody says with their behavior in a game. If they're like, no, that was easy, but they died like 35 times, you're like, well, maybe it wasn't so easy.
When you combine watching someone play while listening to what they say, it puts everything into context. Adrian says, the clearest feedback you can get is to see how someone plays your game. Everything else is easily a distraction. This is where the ethnographic interview methodology comes into play. This methodology was created to get the most why out of a test session. Here's the key mindset. The playtester is the teacher, and you are the student. They aren't the ones being tested. You and your design are being tested. Make sure they know that and empower them to be the teacher. If my playtesters feel dumb, that's because I am dumb. As they play, encourage playtesters to speak their thoughts aloud and to ask questions, but don't tell them how to solve problems, at least not immediately. Just say, and scribble notes like a student attending a lecture would. When a player tells you what to change, ask them why they're suggesting the change. While there's no right way to go about this, in general, while they play, you can stop the player to ask some questions, but remember, your main job is to shut up and watch. Be very careful with your questions too. Avoid prescribing solutions. Don't ask questions like, what would you think about a double jump? Instead, ask something like, how did you feel about the movement? What problems did you encounter? You want to tease out information to understand the real problems rather than accidentally confirm your own biases. Although, feel free to break free of these rules once you feel like the test is over and experiment with other methods. I would love to talk about playtesting processes and tips more, but I think that's a topic for another video. Alright, so now you know that successful game designers base their process around playtesting, calling it the only way to know, and how to get rapid and clear feedback. Maybe now you're thinking, okay, I need to playtest, but... It's time for common excuses for not playtesting and why they're not an excuse. I know, but my game isn't in a place that's ready to playtest yet. In the example I started the video with, I waited 2 years to start playtesting. And after just a handful of tests, it immediately became apparent that the core mechanic was just plain wrong and that I needed to completely redesign. For whatever reason, I thought, oh, the game needs to be completely done before I can playtest it. That's how you get a good playtest. That assumption added a year of game development. Your first goal when designing a game is to get it to a place it can be tested. First by you, and then by someone who's never seen your game before. If you're months into development and you haven't tested your core assumptions yet, you're in danger of having planned way too far into the future on just a hunch. I once spent 3 months programming a design idea only to finally realize how painfully awful it was when it was up and running. I threw it out, moved to paper, and programmed a tiny tool to track the data. Within 2 days, I had a way better design. Within a week, I had an amazing design. I sometimes test games before even debugging. So long as there are no showstoppers, I can guide players around the bugs. In super early testing, if I only want to test the core mechanics and game loop, I'll break the golden rule of playtesting and shamefully skip in-game tutorials altogether. I just explain like it's board game night during the test session. This saves me the extra dev time of updating a tutorial alongside a design I'm fumbling with, allowing for faster iteration cycles. While making this video, I found the following quote by the Interaction Design Foundation. Make sure users want to use the app. You can make it usable later. The key here is, you want to spend as little time as possible chasing the wrong ideas and as much time as possible nurturing the best ones. Always ask yourself, what is the smallest testable version of my game or feature? Test early, test often. It's the only way to know. Yeah, but people might take my idea and get to market with it faster. No one wants your idea. Ideas are free. They're useless on their own. Everyone believes their idea is better. It's the execution that counts. If you're worried you don't have a better idea, I have an exercise for you. Force yourself to make a list of 50 new ideas every day until you overcome this fear. And if you're still concerned, have a lawyer create an NDA for you and have testers sign it. To find out if your idea is even worth something to players, show off your game early and often. But nobody will test my game. Finding testers may not be as hard as you think. Here's a list. You can ask friends and family to let you watch them play for 30 minutes while you take notes. You could join a community of game developers and take turns testing each other's games. You could start a Discord server where scheduled testing happens at the same time every week and build it over time. You could start a newsletter and offer early build testing as a sign-up bonus. If you're making a mobile game, take your phone to a party. The drunker the tester, the more open and honest the feedback will be, and the more they will struggle with a difficult design. Ask as many people as you can to be playtesters, because, after all, it's the only way to know. I'm afraid to receive feedback. No one ever admits this, but it's a common concern hiding in all of us. It may even be the core concern fueling the previous excuses discussed. Showing others something we poured our heart and soul into can make us feel very vulnerable. But remember, you are not your work, and your work was created to share with the world, to enrich other people's lives. Your work is not about you, it's about connecting to them, to your audience, but in a way that brings you satisfaction, so stay true to yourself. Your work doesn't have to be for everyone. In the book, Board Game Design Advice from the Best in the World, more than 60 game designers were asked what it's like to have a bad test session, and all of them said some variation of, "Great, that's when I learn a lot." That means your worst case scenario, they hate it, could be viewed as a best case scenario. Here are the things to work on. The true worst case scenario is that you don't get any feedback at all. The more you protect yourself, the weaker you become. So at this point, I would say the question isn't should you playtest? The question is more, when should you stop playtesting? How do you know when your game is done?
Does anybody know that it's done? No, nobody knows. What we're after though is maximizing our likelihood of success, right? And so yes, you could iterate and playtest forever, right, and never release anything, and that would be a poor outcome. But what you get with playtesting is an identification of a bunch of problems that need fixing and an understanding of the things that people find appealing about your game. And at some point, you're going to start hearing a lot more of the positive and a lot less of the negative, and you're going to start feeling a lot more confident. So I don't look at it as, oh, it's the gatekeeping device. No, what it is just the device that steadily, hopefully increases your confidence. If the feedback you're getting is, oh yeah, actually there aren't really any major problems, that's a pretty big milestone.
One way to know, if after the playtest, people start asking when they can play again, that's a pretty good sign to know your design is working. To summarize, why should you playtest? It prevents you from planning too far into the future on a hunch. You confront your hypotheses and adapt to your players. You build trust in your intuition. You get more productivity out of each hour of game design. You become more self-reflective about your inner biases towards your designs. You increase your empathy with players. And you gain intuitive understanding of user experience best practices.
Everybody's goal is just to make an experience that people want to play. So go find out if what you're making is something people want to play, and continue to do that over and over until you get to a point where people want to play your game. If you're unsure about what to do, okay, get more informed. Go gather data. Playtesters will be happy to give it to you.
Now what are you doing? Get out there and playtest already. Go playtest. It's good for you, for your game. If finding your own testers and running your own tests sounds like too much right now, well, I could playtest your game and provide design feedback. I will record a live video where I constructively critique your game. What can you expect to get from these videos? Design challenges. As I play, I will devise design challenges for your game. It's a direct challenge from me to solve a specific tricky problem in the game. I might also offer solutions, but it's up to you as the game designer if and how you want to solve these design challenges. In any event, they're thought-provoking. Problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way. Additionally, I will elaborate on what's working and why, break down the pain points, point to related game design theory, and recommend games that you may mine for other perspectives on your game design problems. Say you were learning to draw and you wanted to know what was off about the anatomy in your drawing. Would you ask someone who doesn't draw for advice? Or would you go to a professional artist? If you're wondering what I know about game design, for more than 10 years, I've designed and playtested my games in a cycle of continuous improvement. I've released over 20 games to audiences that either taught me what I was doing right or ignored them completely and taught me to learn from failure. I've collected advice from countless game design books, videos, and discussions with game developers. As I play games, I keep a diary of design that works and what doesn't. I've taken all this information and turned it into a bag of game design tricks. Tricks I can now pass on to you. Daniel Kahneman once joked in an interview that the best person to give you advice is someone who likes you and wants to see you succeed, but doesn't particularly care about your feelings. Well, I want you to succeed, and I don't care about your feelings. I care about your feelings. Send me your bill. Let's do it. Come on. Check the link in the description to book a time slot with me. Also, if you sign up for the newsletter, where you can learn from more game design advice content like this, and more about the progress of my games, I will send you a free PDF ebook, Design Techniques That Hook Players, containing tricks I've pilfered from countless resources over the years. But if anything, I hope what you've taken away from this video is the benefits of playtesting and why your games cannot live without it. Let me know in the comments if there are any design, testing, or user experience topics you'd like to see me speak more on in the future. Thank you for watching. I love you. I love your eyeballs. I love your clicks. I love your likes. I love your subscribes. Just everything about you.